They drive over country roads to Hitler's War Command Center, the aptly named Wolf's Lair. There, they learn that Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was arriving by train that afternoon. For this reason, the briefing session with Hitler has been moved forward half an hour to 12:30. It is here where things begin to go wrong.
The 20th of July 1944 was a very hot day. Mosquitoes were in the air, a very uncomfortable situation. So they opened the windows. They protected the windows with special steel plates, and you could open to the outside because they wanted to have fresh air.
At 12:30, von Stauffenberg says he wants to change his shirt before joining Hitler. He says he needs his aide's help, and as von Stauffenberg is severely disabled due to his war injury, no one is suspicious. In private, the men begin to set the fuses for their two bombs. But then they are interrupted, and with the meeting with Hitler beginning, the men don't have time to prime their second charge. This is the moment that will change history, for they decide to place only one prepared charge in the briefcase.
But we don't know why they didn't simply pack the second package of explosive into the briefcase. It was presumably also have been detonated by the first package.
Von Heften takes this second charge and waits outside for von Stauffenberg.
After priming his bomb, von Stauffenberg walks for 400 yards to the briefing hut. The chemical fuse allows him maybe 15 minutes to place the bomb and get out of there. He manages to place the briefcase near to Hitler and then leaves the building, saying he was to make an urgent call.
Von Stauffenberg slips out. His briefcase remains under the conference room table, but it lies too close to an officer's feet. He moves it a few feet away, placing it next to one of the table's legs. This casual shift changes the course of history. At 12:42, the bomb explodes. 4 of the 24 people in the room are fatally wounded. 7 more seriously injured. Von Stauffenberg observes the explosion from a distance of about 200 meters. Certain that no one could survive, he bluffs his way out of the compound. But somehow, Hitler lives. With only a sprained wrist, punctured eardrum, and shredded pants leg. On their way out, Werner von Heften throws the second package of explosives out of the car. Later, the Gestapo finds these explosives and records that it was 975 grams of a substance known as plastite W. At 1:15, only a half hour after the explosion, von Stauffenberg and von Heften board a flight back to Berlin. They still have no idea that Adolf Hitler is alive. They would soon find out.
Chemische Erzeugung hat keine Ahnung von Chemie. Werden Sie lieber eine Knarre in die Hand genommen, wäre ich auf dumme Gedanken gekommen. Aber natürlich! Die haben mir bestätigt, dass Sie Verbraucher sind.
Revenge is swift. Within hours, von Stauffenberg and von Heften are arrested and shot. Their fellow conspirators are rounded up and, after ludicrous show trials, executed, many by slow strangulation from piano wire. The war the officers tried to end drags on for 10 more bloody months. Millions die. Entire cities are obliterated. The Soviet Union advances across Eastern Europe, and as a result, an Iron Curtain descends that will not lift for 45 more years. All this happens because something went wrong in Hitler's briefing room. One tiny detail that doomed millions. No eyewitness alive today can tell us what actually happened in the briefing room that July afternoon. The only real records were those made by the Gestapo during their investigation into the bombing. Amazingly, we found them. Although the trials were a mockery of justice, the investigation was surprisingly professional. This is how the Gestapo reported it.
The immediate scene of the crime is the conference room in which the daily briefings took place. Room and all furniture severely damaged, Wood and leather fragments were embedded in the boarding of the walls. Detonation hole shows that the explosive device detonated above floor level. The reconstructed parts of the right of the 3 table supports clearly show the direction of the explosive wave. The upper shock wave destroyed the briefing room and dissipated through the windows, doors, and partition walls.
Armed with this report, we can now reconstruct some details of the blast. These include the size of the room, the 975-gram weight, and final placement of the bomb. All these details are critical to understanding why and how Hitler escaped his just fate. But we need to go further, for there is only one way to illuminate this pivotal chapter in history. And this is to recreate the blasts that almost killed Adolf Hitler. In the New Mexico desert, our explosive tests are about to begin. Decisions were made in this forest that would doom millions. Millions more would die because of what happened in one of these rooms. Or more precisely, what didn't happen. Adolf Hitler should have been blown to pieces. But that same afternoon, he toured the scene of his miracle with his colleague Benito Mussolini. What Mussolini didn't know, but surely guessed, was that Adolf Hitler was plotting revenge against the men who had missed. Now, unsolved history has returned to Hitler's secret headquarters in order to find the pieces that need to be put together. It was known as the Wolf's Lair. And in the summer of 1944, it was perhaps the most secret and secure place on Earth.
The
Wolf's Lair was one of the armed forces' headquarters. When the war against Russia started, Hitler had to be somewhere close to the front, so they built the Wolf's Lair.
Hitler once said that he would gladly sacrifice the lives of 2 paratroop divisions if they could take out the Soviet military high command. And he expected that the Russians or the British would be just as willing to sacrifice crack troops to take him out. So he ordered that his new headquarters should be built in an area difficult for paratroops to land in. Rustenburg in East Prussia was a suitable site due to the problems that enemy paratroopers would face, landing in an area dominated by forest and lakes. The trees also providing natural camouflage.
Raucous Misch, then a sergeant in Hitler's personal SS bodyguard company, remembers.
Als wir dahin kamen, da war das für uns alles neu. Wir haben es auch ganz schnell.
When we arrived there was all new for us. It was called the Wolf's Lair, but because there were so many mosquitoes there, we rechristened it Mückenheim,
Wir haben ja gleich ein Schild geschrieben.
Mosquitoville. We painted a new sign right away, so it got a double name, Wolf's Lair, Mosquitoville.
This Wolf's Lair was divided into 3 concentric security zones, with a special high-security zone for Hitler and his closest associates. This was Zone A. Over 80,000 mines were cleared from this area. It took until 1955, 10 years after the war ended, before it was safe to walk on these paths. At war's end, when the advancing Russians arrived, they found that the Germans had blown up the entire complex. And in doing so, destroyed the physical evidence of von Stauffenberg's bomb attack. Now, our team must recreate the geography of the Wolf's Lair and the precise dimensions of the briefing room where Hitler came so close to death. This complex began as a compound of wooden buildings, but as time went on, brick, concrete, and metal replaced wood. Herein lies a controversy. Some believe that von Stauffenberg thought the fateful meeting would take place in one of these bunkers. For this reason, they believe he brought a smaller bomb, knowing that in these concrete confines, the explosive effects would be much greater. When the briefing was moved to a more conventional structure, his charge was insufficient. But there is evidence that von Stauffenberg knew exactly where the meeting would be. This photograph of von Stauffenberg and Hitler was taken in the Wolf's Lair 5 days before the blast. 5 days earlier, the bunker was off limits for good reason.
Aber jetzt beim Führer, der Bunker, der wurde ja verstärkt.
It was too hot in the bunker. They had just poured hundreds of tons of fresh concrete to strengthen it, and inside it was nearly 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It would have been impossible to have a meeting in there, so the meetings were held in the briefing hut.
But it's really interesting how come this piece here inside of this part. This
I know. This looks like part of the roof, doesn't it?
Yes. It's fall down here.
Today, time has accomplished what explosives never could.
The hard part in my work will be actually to find out how all this rubble was once a real bunker, and that's true for all the buildings in the area. Everything is so destroyed. There's one good thing about the destruction of these buildings. You can see all the layers. Once this is blown apart, you can see how these different layers of wood, bricks, concrete were applied.
What did the briefing room look like in 1944? Nikolai Luka will attempt to rebuild this room as a computer model for our explosive tests. But first, he needs the correct data.
You can see from here, he got show you.
So these are the windows that were open.
Here was the windows that were also open. This was the windows from the room. Inside of this, like a shoe, there was a construction
for the frame?
To hold the...
Or for the steel shutter?
For the steel shutter.
You can see exactly where the frames of the windows were, and that's actually quite helpful. But still, on the other hand, it's quite hard to figure out where that actually was and at what height.
Using the Gestapo report and the existing maps of the complex, we know the briefing room stood here. Our experts revealed the collapsed surface of the concrete roof, still there after 60 years. Our instruments also discover that the top of the roof now lies at nearly the exact height of the map table surface when the bomb went off. So although we are on top of the ruin, we really stand in the middle of the briefing room. The table was here. Hitler stood here. Michael Federowitz demonstrates where the bomb was originally placed before being moved.
And then Colonel von Stauffenberg came in with a bomb in a suitcase, and he put the suitcase exactly here. And then he left the room, and another Wehrmacht officer put the suitcase, because it was disturbing, and put it here, behind the solid wooden leg of the map table. And that's the reason why Hitler didn't lose his life. So
here we discover one other incredible coincidence.
Hitler was looking at a map of the Eastern Front, and the ironical thing is, if the German Wehrmacht would be more advanced to the east, he would be on the right place where the bomb was placed.
And that right place would have killed him. Caught between the advancing armies of the Soviets and the Nazis' own need to obliterate their past, little documentary evidence exists. For example, we know Hitler was saved by his conference table. But what did that table look like? In analyzing an explosion, every detail is critical. The size of the charge, where the charge is placed, the shape of the room, whether the windows were open or closed. 4,000 miles away from Rostenburg, in a photographic archive in Washington, D.C., some of these details can be found. We just need to know where to look. By all all odds, Adolf Hitler should have been blown apart in a blast that claimed the lives of 4 of his henchmen and wounded 7 others. Hitler believed it was an act of divine providence, proof that he was destined to win the Second World War. This determination would last until he committed suicide in his Berlin bunker 10 months later. Ironically, the plot that should have ended the war wound up prolonging it. Nobody can say for certain how he managed to survive with just a sprained wrist, punctured eardrum, and a shredded uniform. Unsolved history was determined to recreate the blast, but in order to exactly duplicate the effects, we needed to know several things. First, the exact dimensions and construction details of the briefing hut. Second, the exact shape and strength of the table. And third, the exact size and chemical composition of the bomb. As the men who placed the bomb had been captured and executed, and all traces of the hut erased after the war, our goal to recreate the wolf slayer was difficult. But there was one way to go back in time, and that was through a set of rare photographs taken by Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. After the war, most of the Nazi documents and photographs that hadn't been burned by the Germans were confiscated by the Allies. Many to end up in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. We hoped that somewhere in these thousands of photographs, we might find some hidden glimpses of the briefing room.
Okay, what you can see here is the strips that show the damage.
Oh, you can see it.
After the bombing.
Yeah, this window is all busted down. You can see some of the curtains hanging outside the windows.
There are no images of the interior. However, there are such shots, but not in these albums.
Not in these albums, yeah. Here's a really nice one. 2 German officers standing. You can see behind them is a wreckage of what went on inside when that bomb exploded.
But then we made a discovery.
Martin, I noticed there's holes cut into this album and it appears strips peeled away. Do you know how that might have occurred?
Aside from the heavy use of these albums, that could be one of the reasons why they have now restricted people to surrogates of these albums, because people probably ripped them off, cut them out.
Yeah, you can see
used a razor blade, because in this case you can see what's missing here, because someone on the other side
wanted something.
Took this frame.
Right. Someone has actually stolen a part of history.
But the images we did find helped in our computer recreation. Slowly, we begin to rebuild Hitler's briefing room. The Gestapo report gives us the dimensions. Our location work confirms details of the building's construction. And finally, our mosaic of photographs and eyewitness accounts fill in the remaining details.
Photos that Marty Baldessari found in the National Archives confirm absolutely what we found on site at the Wolf's Lair. We measured known parts. For example, since we've been in the Wolf's Lair ourselves, we knew exactly that these windows from the ruins that are still there are 1 meter wide. Relating that with a few perspective tricks in the computer to this table and things like this hand, Göring's hand, probably a few percentages longer than my 20 centimeter long hands, we found out that this table was exactly 1 meter 20 wide and 6 meters long.
We made another discovery for our reconstruction, and that is something so simple that most historians have ignored its significance. The table was built in breakaway sections.
During our research, we found photographs of 4 long map tables used by Hitler. We think now that there were standardized table parts which could be combined to make tables of different lengths or support different loads. I mean, you can't get a table this big and bulky into a bunker. The corridors are too narrow and you wouldn't be able to get the table around the corners. So the only possibility is to have a table made of prefabricated parts that can be moved individually and then put together inside the bunker, like a ship in a bottle.
As the table was designed to break apart, the explosive force would have been dramatically different than previously calculated. Michael and Nico used the computer to reconstruct Hitler's position and the effects of this blast.
Well, that's exactly the situation, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And you see Hitler leaning over the table,
Mm-hmm.
you know, his elbow on the surface and his chin resting in his hand. And it seems that this part of the table protected him a little bit.
Maybe even the explosion caused parts of the table to spin around his head.
And he was not touched by these flying things.
These two pieces of wood protected him from the rest of the explosion.
It appears that during the explosion, Hitler's leaning position and the breakaway table could have saved his life. We now have all of the details to produce our explosive tests. It is time to head to New Mexico and kill Hitler. It has never been easy to find a place to set off explosives. In this post-9/11 era, the job is harder. But Unsolved History soon found the right spot.
Here at the Energetic Materials Research and Testing Center, our charter is to do research, development, and testing on explosives, bombs, warheads.
We brought Dietmar Arnold from Germany to oversee our construction efforts. Even a small difference would render our tests historically inaccurate.
What we're going to be building here today is the replica of this table. We're going to try to get this table to look as much as possible as what it was in the original.
As we can see here, looks good. The original construction looks a little bit NASA, but it's, I think, absolute no problem.
Now, for the first time, we are going to be able to measure the force of the blast that Hitler was exposed to and survived. In order to duplicate the July 20th, 1944 bomb plot, which should have killed Adolf Hitler, Unsolved History has reproduced every detail surrounding the event. We have duplicated the precise dimensions of the briefing room, the conference table, the men surrounding Hitler, and Hitler himself. But we were still missing one element: the bomb. In order to reproduce this charge exactly, the engineers at EMRTC used an explosive with similar properties to match the components of the original bomb.
This is C4, which is going to take the place of the hexagen, which von Stauffenberg was using at the time, which is no longer available. And today we're going to mold this into a charge, which we believe was approximately brick shaped. And then we'll be inserting the detonator into the priming hole, and then just simply insert this into the satchel.
In order to make sure the table and military mannequins are placed accurately, we flew in European team leader Dietmar Arnold.
Here we have had the bomb, you know, here there was some generals, and here we have the position of Hitler, you know. But what do you think if we haven't had the generals? He will die or not?
Well, all matter is going to absorb somewhat of the blast. The energy can be reflected off of surfaces, or it can be absorbed by surfaces. Anything in between is going to be a barrier to him. The blast pressure can go around obstacles, but the fragments will obviously be absorbed by anything in between.
The blast wave moves through the room and back, bouncing off the walls.
But I'm really wonder if you see to the photographies, how it's possible that people can alive inside of this room, you know, after this detonation.
Explosions create extreme air pressure, and this air pressure is what kills. In order to measure the force of the July 20th bomb, exact measurements need to be taken.
We're going to measure the overpressure in the room with these two gauges. This one is to measure the pressure that is reflected or is sent over here from the bomb behind the table leg. And this gauge over here is looking at the bomb, and it is sensing the pressure that is coming directly from the bomb. There is nothing in between the two.
Once the explosion occurs, we will need to determine the extent of damage to our stand-in mannequins.
And this is a military replica of a human body, about the same height as an average 6-foot human. It's going to show some evidence of blast by fractures on it, but mostly the impacts of fragments where they'll be embedded.
So the Hitler mannequin is actually more lifelike. It's got a soft tissue surface so that we'll be able to see when the blast comes what splinters went where on the body.
The outcome of this test is determined by the accuracy of the bomb replica.
In original, we have had around 970 gram of explosive materials, but I don't know the American from the sites. We get the same result.
We looked at the chemical composition of the explosive that was actually used and looked at the equivalent energy from C4 and calculated that there's about 10% less energy available in the original explosive.
Well, we have 2.2 pounds, which is 1 kilogram equivalent, but we can easily go down and adjust that weight back to 2 pounds to the 10% off.
Before we set off the explosion, our explosives expert, Brad Bowling, will make the correct adjustments.
Okay, Brad, I think now your job starts. I give you the briefcase and now you must move the bomb.
Now, everyone is cleared from the site and secured in a bunker 200 yards away from the blast site. We are ready. This is what actually happened to Adolf Hitler on July 20th, 1944.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Before we look at the damage to our Hitler double, we need to examine the air pressure readout to see the degree of injury Hitler's eardrums and internal organs may have sustained.
This graph on the screen here is a pressure reading, which reads about 1.1 psi. That would blow your eardrums.
This 1.1 psi readout is exactly the force needed to cause the loss of hearing in one ear that Hitler sustained on July 20th. So far, our blast is following in the footsteps of history.
As you can see, this is the crater. It's about what was predicted to be 8 to 9 inches deep. The table end is also thrown to the opposite end of the room. So it's pretty much just as the picture is, of the actual one is. That one has a little more damage than what our table did.
Our test closely duplicates the real blast. But how closely?
As you can see, the tabletop acted as a shield. You can see the leg here also, that's right where the bomb was placed against it.
Could Hitler really have survived this blast?